Vincent Diaz, Bobby Mena, might be Bobby Mena, Jimmy Capito, and the interviewer was Moses Mora. And this was at 97 Dos Caminos Avenue, Ventura. I think that's Jimmy's house. And the date was September 29th, 2003. So this is one of the later interviews, and the transcriber was Suzanne Lawrence, and this is in the form of an interview. So I'll identify the people talking, probably by their first names. We are going to start. This is Moses Mora on September 29th, 2003. We're at Jimmy Capito's house in Ventura to interview Vincent Diaz and Bobby Mena for the Tortilla Flats archives. Also present are Bobby's wife, Ann, M.B. Hanrahan, the artistic director, and Dan, who is videotaping. And did I mention Jimmy Capito? Jimmy. Oh, I'm here. I've been interviewed once before, so now I'm just here to barely be in the conversation. That's about it. Moses. Okay, so let's go in kind of alphabetical order. We'll start with Vincent Diaz. Just go ahead and talk about when you were born, who your parents were, your immediate family, and like that, for a few minutes. And then we'll get to Bobby. Vincent Diaz. Okay, well, my name is Vincent Diaz, and I was born here in Ventura, California, and the house that I was born in was on Valdez Alley, which is close to the old mission. They have some of the grounds there where they've been excavating and so forth, and that alley that you see going up to the hill, right to the side, our house is there. And right below that was a little Chinese restaurant, which I'm sure a lot of you people who have been here all your lives know who it was, the Golden Dragon. I was born in 1928, September 28th, 1928, which happens to be yesterday. Vincent. You're in good company. My parents came to America from Mexico back in around 1910 from the revolution that was going on over there. A lot of Mexicans were coming across over the border to get away from Pancho Villa and all of his gang. Gilbert is gone, Mike is gone, and the only brothers I have is Eddie Diaz. I can recall in my earliest years, when I was a youngster, maybe about 6 years old, that we lived on Santa Clara Street across from what used to be the oil company which was there. I can't remember the name. They were there for years and years and years. Anyhow, from there we moved over to Meta Street, 218 West Meta. This was about in 1935 when we went to the Tortilla Flats. From there, we went to Holy Cross from the first grade until I graduated in 1944. From the 8th grade there at Holy Cross. And afterwards, I started meeting my other friends, like Bobby Mena. As I can recall, what we used to call the, quotes, real Tortilla Flats, quotes, because we were there, we considered ourselves part of the people that made it. To the north of us was Santa Clara Street, and to the west of us was River Street, and to the south of us was Brook Street, and then Garden Street came, I guess you want to call north, south, and the tracks separated us from the other people, because in those days, people didn't want to be associated saying that they were from the flats. Of course, these people are not here now because they are gone, so they can't defend themselves. But I'm just trying to state a fact. There's the sound of someone chuckling in the background. That when people would be asked, are you from the flats? They would say, oh no, the flats is on the other side of the tracks. We have sidewalks and they don't. Of course, now that you guys are doing this fantastic program, now that the people that were close to the flats, I think they're trying to get into the lower of it so they can be interviewed and be photographed and have their names and pictures and so forth. But I'm just stating a fact because I'm telling you here right now that we were the original people from Tortilla Flats. Any questions? Moses. Well, yeah, there's going to be plenty of questions, but let's get to Bobby at that point also to talk about his family and where they lived and who his brothers and sisters were and some overview kind of statements that Vincent made, and then we'll get into both of you asking other things that were happening around in the community. And Jimmy, chime in whenever, okay? Okay, Bobby? Laughs, or Robert. Bobby Mena. Everyone always called me Bobby, so that's how I grew up. And anybody today who calls me Bobby is someone I've known for a long time. I'll tell you, I know somebody from that era. I was born May 11th, 1929, at 70 West Meta Street, which later became known as the Salad Bowl Curve. And I was born in the house that all the trucks used to run into. People would come running from all the different neighborhoods, even from the flats. You hear laughter in the background. To come and pick up produce. And I think we used to get a truck about once a month. It was the darndest thing. And I think the only thing that never tipped over was cattle. There was lemons. I don't know how many different times. All kinds of vegetables. And even one time I remember a truck full of, it has booze, but it tipped on its side and it fell right over on this side of the curb. You could smell it all over the neighborhood, but it never broke open. As the day went on, they would bring another truck along to pick up all the stuff and transfer it over to another truck or whatever. So I used to get a job. I was always looking forward to getting a job helping them reload the truck. I can't remember how old I was when this started happening, but that curve was so severe that at 30 miles an hour, it took everything they had to hang onto the wheel. And by the time they got around to where we lived, the truck would tip over. There was one incident in particular that later came out in the paper, and I'll never forget it. We were next to the corner, and right next to us was a big house that sat way back in the lot. The people who lived there were called the Hartmans. Bobby continues, and that sat way back in the lot. The people who lived there were named Hartmans, and that's all I remember, Paul Hartman. And across the street from us is where Jimmy and his family lived. Jimmy: yes, Ernie was my age. My parents were real tight with the Hartman family. Bobby: and their house sat a little bit back, and then the next house over was ours. Somehow, in between, kind of dividing the properties, was a ditch, and that was about 3 feet deep, and it went like this. One night, a truck came through here, and it was a smaller truck, actually, and the guy lost control, and he came around the curve, and there he went, right through part of the front lawn, and he hit that ditch, and he tipped over. He fell over the side, right where my bedroom was. He starts laughing. I was sound asleep. I was such a sound sleeper, and my mom comes running in there, and she was screaming and everything. I didn't know what the heck had happened. Fortunately, that ditch, I owe my life to a ditch today, because if it wasn't for the ditch, he would have gone right through the house. But anyway, he fell over on his side. I don't know what happened to him, but then the Star came, and they wanted to take pictures of me in bed and that, and I said, no, I don't want to. And the one that came out in the paper later on when they interviewed my grandmother, who raised me, by the way, this was when the gas truck knocked out one of the telephone poles. And they kept knocking these poles out forever and ever, it seemed like. And later on, they put some eucalyptus stumps, one on one side and one on the other side of the walk, and 4 in front of the walk. And those, well, eucalyptus, when it dries, it's like cement. So that was the only thing. And they were thinking about putting a wall up, but they never did. And that was as close as they got. Moses: did you have brothers and sisters? Bobby: I have one sister that I grew up with. Her name was Juanita, and she later married Tony Jaramillo, who also lived in that general vicinity, just the other side of the tracks. There was a great big field there where all these carnivals used to come and everything, and Tony and his family were there. I think they kind of bordered up to Santa Clara Street. Moses: which Tony is that? Bobby: Tony Jaramillo and all his family. Tony, Leo, Virginia, Vera, and all of them. Anyway, Tony later married my sister. They're both gone now. I lost my sister just about 3 years ago, and I lost my brother-in-law, Tony. It's been about 2 years. Moses, and where did you go to school? Bobby, I went to school at Mayhenning. I was born in that house at 70 West Meta Street. I was born in that house. Dr. Weed, he laughs, was an osteopath, and he was the one that delivered me. And you? JC, that was Jimmy. Yeah. Bobby, yeah, I think he did everybody. Jimmy, I'm sure he did. Bobby, my grandmother was a midwife. I remember him saying that. So I was born right there in that house, 70 West Meta Street, which is now considered Thompson, all the way down to the avenue. It used to be called Meta Street. I went to Mayhenning School all through the grades up to Ventura Junior High, and then I went from over there to where the high school is now. At the time, there was 4 grades, and it was junior high from 7th to 10th, and then high school was 10th and 11th and 12th. And then the first 2 years of college was the junior college. So we were mixed up in there with the junior college at the time. I finished my 11th year, and then I decided to go into the service. I kind of got tired of going to school, he laughs. But after I'd been in the service about 6 months, I took my GED test, and that's how I got my diploma, but I didn't finish high school. Jimmy, you did good. You know what? Vincent was telling me a little anecdotal story when we were talking the other day. Tell me about the Reverend, your neighbor from the AME church, and the way he greeted the rising sun every day and the impact it had on you. Vincent, yes. In fact, the house is still there, right there in the corner of what used to be West Meta, but the freeway goes over it now. That house is still there, and our house was right next door to it. This family was the Brooks family, a very fine black family, and I believe, well, their father, he was a minister at the Baptist church that is still there on Santa Clara Street. I don't know if he was the founder of the church or not. That I do not know, but I can remember that this man, early in the morning, say about 4 o'clock in the morning, he would be praising the Lord, singing with this deep, resonant voice that black singers have, just like you see in the movies. This man just had this gorgeous voice. 4 o'clock in the morning, he's praising the Lord. They were very nice people. In those days, we didn't have that kind of prejudice of black living close to Latino or vice versa. We had a Filipino family that lived on Meta Street also, and we had us people there at Tortilla Flats. We had a real close relationship because we had been there for so long. We used to go out there and pick prunes, and you name it. We'd go to San Jose and be gone maybe 45 or 60 days, and then come back. And my dad would say, well, now you guys are through picking up north, we're going to go pick walnuts. So we'd come to Ventura here and pick walnuts, there by where the Ford garage used to be. Vincent Diaz, Powers Ranch? Vincent, well, that Powers Ranch, that was the Big Lemon Ranch, and I worked there when I was a teenager during the war. But the fondest memories I have about Tortilla Flats, especially in the afternoons, say about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the women would start cooking. The women were cooking the tortillas, the beans, and the potatoes to make their guisados, their stews, into tortilla. And if you were walking, crossing the tracks, all this aroma would hit you right in the face, because the wind coming from the Ventura River and the ocean would bring this aroma over. In our days, everyone was a poor person, but hard-working people. We could run into our neighbor and say, I need some sugar. Sure. And then they would give us a cup of sugar. I need a couple of eggs, or this, or that. And that's how close Tortilla Flats people were in those days. Because on the other side of the tracks, it was a different world for us. Those are the memories that I have about Tortilla Flats. It's very unfortunate that the freeway had to go through there because chances are maybe this would have still been there. Who knows? Moses Mora. Before we get into, say, the war years or anything, we've seen several pictures of you with your guitar. Do you want to talk about how that came to be? Vincent. Okay. My uncle Leonard Wilson, he was a violin player. He played with George Pacheco and Bobby, who was my uncle, by the way. Vincent. Right. And the Flores, and so forth. So, as a result, later, I started picking up the guitar, and then I started playing with my uncle, just there at the house. Then some of the other guys started coming over. Pacheco, Pete Rodriguez, he'd come over there also. Moses. And was this like Mexican music or popular music or... Vincent. Mexican music. Only Mexican music. So, as a result, I was strumming along with them, and my cousin, Johnny Flores, at the time, he had been playing much longer than I was, and he was strumming along, and I used to follow him. Later on, when I met Johnny Palacio, he used to play guitar. He was a young man, and we got together and we started playing, practicing, and singing, what have you, and finally got to the point that just about every night of the week, we had a little back room in the back. We'd go back there and we'd practice and sing and what have you. And as a result, we got to be kind of good. In fact, at one time, Bobby Mena says, "Hey, I want you guys to come over to my house." He used to fix us up these Moscow mules, this drink that's made in a copper mug and so forth. Bobby. It was vodka and ginger beer. It was good. And you serve it in a copper cup. It had a kick. It really did. That's why we called it a Moscow mule. He starts laughing. I don't know where I got the idea. Someone introduced me to them, and we all used to drink them up there. Vincent. So he used to invite us over to his house, and we'd go into his room, and he'd say, "You guys bring your guitars over." And we used to play and sing. Bobby would be playing the maracas. This guy here, by rights, should have been a musician because he is very knowledgeable about the big bands, the jazz scene, and what have you. But getting back to your question, Johnny and I, we kept playing and singing. We played for KVEN when Enrique Palomino was there, the radio announcer from Oxnard. We practiced in some contests, which... we worked very hard, but we ended up in second place. And then we performed in Oxnard for a show with the dancers and the singers. Moses. Like a review? Vincent. Yeah. So that's how my friend, Johnny Palacio, may he rest in peace, that's how we all got together. We were inseparable. In fact, he and I composed the song that they call El Corrido de Ventura. It is a song that we made about Ventura, saying how beautiful this little town is, one of the most beautiful little towns in the coast, surrounded by the mountains at the north and cradled by the Pacific Ocean to the south. And this town is a town where all the machos reign and all the newlyweds prefer to live in this town when they get married. Being the county seat of Ventura, it says, "We don't want anyone to interfere here, or else you'll pay the price by going to jail." And then, at the end of the song, we say, "With this shout, I tell all of you people that when I die, I want to die here in Ventura." That's basically what the song's about. And Mr. Capito will sing it, Jimmy, next Saturday night. It's a wonderful song, and you told it, you translated it, and told the story beautifully. That is exactly the way the words go in Espanol. Moses, what a tribute. What love for your community here. I don't know your musical era. That probably took you from teenager to adult, but let's talk about what either of you did in the military service. Want to start, Bobby? Bobby, well, like I said, I left after my junior year of school into the Navy, and I was just in for 2 years. Moses, and what years were those? That was 1946 to 1948. I would have been in the class of 47 if I had stayed in school. Moses, World War II ended in 46. Bobby, 1945. But the duration wasn't considered over until 50, I believe, because I was considered a World War II vet. Moses, so you were Navy. Bobby, I was in the Navy, but I was stuck out at China Lake in the desert. I had to come home to see the ocean. They all laugh. I'd be hitchhiking out in the desert, coming this way, and people would say, "Where do you live?" And I'd say, "On the coast, over here in Ventura, California." It was quite something. Everyone laughed at me. I wanted to get on a ship, but that was the best I could do. But it was only for 2 years. Actually, World War II was over, and they let all the reserves out, and they had to do something to replace them. So this is the first time, to my knowledge, and even now, that the Navy ever had 2-year enlistments. They had 2, 3, 4, or 6, and I said, well, I'll take 2. I'm not greedy. I'll just take 2 years. I did my 2 years, and I got out. Moses, so you were 19 or 20 when you got out? Bobby, yes, I was quite young. In fact, I had to sign up for the draft because of Korea, and had I stayed with my class, they were the first ones that went to Korea. Had I stayed with them, in fact, there was a kid, I don't know if you ever knew, he was a guy who lived in Montalvo, Richard Campos. Him and I used to run track together in high school. He was one of the first guys in the county to get killed over in Korea. I can't think of his name at the moment, it escapes me, but anyway, I would have been right in the thick of it with those guys had I not gone into the service when I did, such as it was. So anyway, I got out and signed up for the draft, and I remember signing up for the draft, and they didn't believe me. "You're only 19. How could you have been in?" I said, "Well, here's my discharge papers and here's my ID. What more can I tell you?" So actually, I wasn't 1A anymore because I'd already been in, and I wasn't in the reserves. So that was that. When I got out, I kind of bummed around a bit, and then I got a job at Port Hueneme, and I've given the civil service 30 years. I had some broken time in between, and I moved up north for a while. Moses, you must have known my Uncle Paul Ariano. Bobby, oh yeah, I remember the name. Moses, he worked out at the base for 38 years, and he was 75 years old. Oh, really? Well, I'm not 75 yet. Vince is older than me. He starts laughing. I'll be 75 next May. Yeah, I was out there for several years, and then I quit, and I got a job in LA for a while, working down there. And then I came back and worked for a few more years, and then I got married, and I moved up north. And I was working for Lockheed up in Sunnyvale, and I was there for several years. Then my marriage kind of went down the tubes, so I moved back here, and I've been here ever since. My lovely wife and I are still here, and we've been married 30 years. In fact, we both have wives named Anne, Vince and I. Moses, Vincent, were you in the military? Vincent, I wasn't in the military. I tried 4 times. I tried in 1946, and I got as far as Fort Ord. They put us up the night that we got there, and the next day they called us up early in the morning at 6 o'clock, and I get to stand there and stand in line, and he says 2 names, and I'll never forget them. Diaz and Pennington. Stepping out. What happened here? He says, you guys are going home. We don't need you. So I got home that night. And it was New Year's Eve, and everyone was coming out of the theaters when our bus stopped there. Then afterwards, I got drafted for the Korean War, and this was a time that I really didn't want to go. So I went to Washington Boulevard, where they gave you all the physical examinations, so forth, in Los Angeles. And they call me back and they say, we can't use you. Besides, you've already had 4 brothers in the service, Herbert, Edward, Mike, and Gilbert. And I was the youngest. So that was the end of my military career. Bobby, that was when they decided not to have too many from the same family in the service. Jimmy, yeah, can I throw in another little anecdote about Vincent's musical experiences and career? I don't recall the exact date, but it was mid-50s, thereabouts. Maybe it was 57 or some date like that. But Vincent and his protege, Don Adams, who was a singer par excellence, he could sing the Spanish songs just like nobody could. Well, Vincent and he had a repertoire, and they were well known for their music. And all of a sudden, the word got out that they would be playing on the radio, which was a gigantic deal. They were going to be playing at the radio station on Santa Clara Street, in California Street, in that little building that is still here to this day. And at that time, it had a large bay window where what was going on in the radio could be seen by everybody out there. When the word got out, there were cars parked up and down both streets. My friend Raymond Fuller and I, we got about 5 or 6 cars back on California Street facing the radio station, and everybody with their radios turned onto the station, just hyped up on this situation. And then, there they go. They knocked out 2 beautiful numbers. I think one of them may have been Tangolele. I'm not sure. Vincent. It was. Jimmy. And the other one may have been Sinti, or one of those great ballads. Everybody's mouth watered. We just had a super ball. We couldn't believe our buddies were playing on the radio. End of story. But that's just a little tidbit I wanted to share with y'all. Moses. Shall we start talking about the Green Mill Ballroom? Did you ever go there? Bobby. Oh, are you kidding? Yeah. Laughter. I'd go every chance I could. Yeah, that was the place to go. Vincent. Bobby was a well-known dancer there. Bobby. Oh, I love to dance. I love to dance even when I went into the service, I guess. And I remember when I was in the service, we used to get big bands out there too, about every week. But at the Green Mill Ballroom, we used to get all the big bands. Moses. Do you remember who was there? Bobby. Harry James, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey. I remember one night in particular, Harry James had played at the Green Mill Ballroom and then at what we used to call the Bathhouse, the Civic Auditorium on California Street where the Holiday Inn is now. Artie Shaw was playing there the same night. I was trying to decide where I wanted to go, and I knew Artie Shaw was a fantastic musician, but at the time I think Harry James was at the Green Mill, and he had this vocalist at the time, and she was really popular, and her name was Kitty Callan, and she sang Beginning to See the Light. I knew she was going to be there, so I said, I'm going to go see Harry James. And had I gone to the Bathhouse, Artie Shaw was there with his new bride, Ava Gardner. Jimmy, ay. Bobby. And she was bombed out of her mind. And they said, you should have gone there. And I said, well, you just go where you want. Jimmy, can you imagine having those 2 choices right here in Ventura? Moses, what year do you think that was? Late 40s or? Bobby. And then later on, his sister, Helen Diaz, was married to, well, you can tell him. Vincent, Eddie Griego. And him and Ralph Romero were the promoters of the Green Mill Ballroom. And they brought in Perez Prado. They brought in Tangolele. In fact, she didn't have a piano. It didn't show up, so I had to play the guitar for her. Moses, is that right? Vincent, yes. You were younger then, obviously. I never heard the Trio Los Panchos either. We had the big bands, like you said. We had Tommy Dorsey and we had Charlie Barnett. The night that we tried to get in the Green Mill when Charlie Barnett was playing, we were told, you guys cannot come in. They wouldn't allow the Chicanos to come in. Then a whole bunch of us went down to the police station. Remember Chief Neal? Bobby, yeah, Billy Neal. And then we have a note that Tangolele was the #1 exotic dancer in Latin America at the time. And that's from Jimmy Capito. Okay, back to Vincent. Well, we went down there and we told him about it. And he said, well, what do you expect me to do? And I said, well, you're the police. Why don't you go tell them that we have to get in? But to make a long story short, we couldn't get in. At the Ventura Theater in the early 40s, they wouldn't let us in either. Did you ever experience that? Bobby, no. Vincent, yeah. They used to check us for knives. Everybody's cutting the leather seats because it was a beautiful theater with leather seats and everything, and that's what we ran into during that era. I don't know. You might have to maybe blame a change of minds with different ideas. Who's to say? But that's what we encountered. Bobby. That was one of the reasons that during that period of time, the different towns were always battling each other. There was a lot of fighting going on. Oxnard and Ventura or Santa Paula. Whenever those guys would come to town, they'd get in there and mix it up. I used to go to Santa Barbara a lot of times on the weekends to go up and see this one group up there. And then it's just a blank. And all of us, we went up there. It was a fun place to go. Vincent. Don Pedro and his Hungry Five? Question mark. Bobby. Yeah, that was great. And there was one of the reasons it just got to be because I just loved to dance. But invariably, it was going to be a fight that night. Somewhere. 1 or 2 fights. And I just thought that was ridiculous. If I can't go and dance, because that's really all I cared about. So I says, nah, I don't need this kind of hassle. And that's why I went into the service, primarily. I wanted to get away from it. Anyway, I did, such as it was. But that was an era. Was that considered the Pachuco era, too? Vincent. The Pachuco era began in the 40s, and then by 44, the war was going full blast, and a lot of those people were already being taken into the service. When they came back to a different society altogether. I guess a lot of guys met friends in the service that perhaps they might have been, well, maybe enemies of before. Who knows? The transition was that World War II made men out of these young guys. Bobby. But even in those days, getting back to it, they had the turf wars like the kids have today. That's basically what it was all about. The guys from Ventura and the guys from Santa Paula, Oxnard, all these different areas, So you just stayed on your own turf and you didn't go anywhere else to do your thing, and hopefully you get through it. But really, I don't think it was as bad as it is today. Today they don't take a second look at you. They'll just shoot you. Jimmy. Well, what about individuals that was extraordinary? This is a question that I'm going to be asking next Saturday night. If there's any events that were outstanding that you can recall, or if there were any individuals that were extraordinary in their own way. Bobby. Well, I remember one, but he wasn't really part of this area. In fact, he was from Santa Paula. Vince knew him too, as well. He's the one that came to national fame with that song Tequila. And that was Danny Flores. We all knew him because he was always around this area, and he played in all the clubs around town. Vincent. The old Silver Dollar there in Wainimi. Bobby. So we all knew him before he changed his name. In fact, I think he's still into entertaining, but I think he's down in the Long Beach area or something like that. Moses. Didn't he also change his name? Bobby. Yes. He changed it to Chuck Rio, and that's when they recorded that. It was Chuck Rio and the Champs. And in that group, I understand, I don't know it for an actual fact, but I understood that Glenn Campbell was one of those guys that later went on to even more fame. But Danny, that was his only claim to fame. Jimmy. He was an amazing guy. I think it's been about 4 years ago, but he was one of the star performers at the Ventura Beach Party, the event by the Holiday Inn along there. And he had his wife and his side people. He had a full band there. What a smooth performer. And this was just 4 years ago. Bobby. That's right. Because I was thinking about it the other night at your party when they played Tequila. I thought to myself, I wonder how many of these people they know. Like, we knew him personally. Jimmy. Tony Flores. If ever there was a musician that earned his... Vincent's partner, Tony Flores, had to be one of the most outstanding musicians we've ever had from the old neighborhood. Vincent. We were playing with the club 577 when this tequila business was going full blast. In fact, we took that song and used it as a closing tune a lot at the performances that we did. Moses. The 577? Where was that located? Vincent. That was located, you know where the Grace Scott store was on the corner there of Main and Chestnut? Moses. That was Jack Rose. I remember that, yeah. Vincent. So there used to be a place right next to it. And it's now, well, I guess the theater's taken it over. Bobby. I think it's the Salz's place, right on Main Street. Jimmy. On the corner there, it is. The 577 was the next store there. Alan Garcia, my buddy, and I, we would be like cruising Main Street at night, and we'd go by the 577, and that music, it was like a snake charmer. We heard them playing Poinciana. You know, there's a part of that that's in a minor key, and it just draws you in. And more than once, we were drawn into the topper by these guys and their music. Bobby. We're both related to Tony, however. Him and Vincent and I are not related, only through friendship. Vincent. Tony Flores and I are first cousins. My mother, his mother, and Johnny Barrios' mother are all sisters. Moses. What was their maiden name? Vincent. Wilson. When we got together, Tony had been in the Army, had played in the Army bands, and was doing very well. When he got out, he was playing with Little Ray, a little crippled guy, and Edo Medina, and Benny Duran, and then I was playing with my cousin, Johnny Flores, and we had the Rhythm Rangers. We were a Western band, and we were playing. So, when Tony comes back, he says, maybe they should just come over here and listen to you guys. So we went over there and played, and after they left, he says, hey, Vin, hey, cuz, I need a guitar player. And I say, I'm playing with these guys. I got more jobs than these guys do. So I ended up playing with my cousin in the early 50s. And I played there until 77. And these guys were playing already 5 nights a week. And I said I couldn't do it. I tried it for 2 weeks and then I just about died. And I said, that's the end of it. So in 1977, I quit playing. Moses. I noticed in one of those pictures you were with a band, but you were playing an acoustic guitar. Was that tough? I mean, I'm sure you're using the technology available at the time and maybe electric guitars and amplifiers. Vincent. We were playing at the Green Mill at the time, and KUDU was broadcasting the performance. Now, there is a pickup, which used to be the Diamond pickup, and they had, because I was using my Martin guitar, which was a 00021 model, and after that, I got a big amplifier, and I got my first guitar, well, you know. Yes, the one right there. Moses. Your electric guitar. Vincent. This is my Gretsch. I had another Gretsch before that, and in one of my performances right there at the 577, my neck strap broke, and my Gretsch went flying to the floor. They all groaned. And that was on a Friday night. The next day, I went to J.B. Penney. He was the one who had them. Moses, up on Main Street. Vincent, right, the music store. I say, J.B., I said, here's what happened to my guitar. I says, can you guys fix it? And he said, this guitar is going to need more than fixing, Vince. You better throw it away. And I said, well, I'm playing, J.B. I need a guitar. And he said, well, do you want me to rent you one? I said, no. I looked up at the wall and I saw this beautiful Gretsch guitar, and I said, how much do you want for that? And JB starts laughing. He says, you want that guitar, Vince? And I say, well, how much is it? Well, that guitar and the case is going to cost you $750. And this is way back in 55, so you can imagine what that guitar is worth. So I got it, and I still have that baby. In fact, 5 years ago, a guy called me, because I was in the musician's book, 805, and he calls me and he says, Vince, I'm so-and-so, and I've seen you play, and I've seen your guitar. Do you have this model number guitar, so-and-so? I said, yes. And he says, I'll give you $3,500 for it. And I says, no, it's not for sale. It's not for sale. Because he saw what I had in the original condition. I haven't done anything to the guitar. It's just like when I bought it. Another guy came to me when I was playing another time, and he says, how much do you want for your guitar? And I said, well, it's not for sale. I've already turned down $3,500 for it. And he says, I'll give you $4,500 for it. It's not for sale. So I still have it, and I guess I'm not going to sell it. Jimmy, doesn't look like it. Vincent, that was part of my life. Bobby, I was going to tell you, I said that Tony was my cousin too, and I wanted to explain how he was my cousin. Actually, he's a little more distant to me. His dad, who was also a musician, and what did he play? I don't remember. Vincent, he played guitar. Bobby, and he was a cousin to my grandmother, so he would have been my mother's first cousin. Anyway, I was a second or third cousin or something on his dad's side. Of course, he's from his mother's side, so that's how we... And then his dad and the rest of them, every Christmas, my grandmother's birthday was Christmas Day, and early in the morning, and this is what Christmas was for me growing up, and I don't remember ever when the tree came into it, but it was her birthday, and early in the morning, she would always cook the day before. She would cook all kinds of stuff early in the morning, and here would come his uncle, Leonard Wilson, Louis Andrade, George Pacheco, Pete Rodriguez, Tono, all of them. They'd all come over onto the outside, and they would serenade my grandmother. In those days, that was the thing to do, and they would serenade her, and then she would invite them in, and from then on, it was just party time. I could remember, as a kid, just a little guy, and I can remember year after year that it was grandmother's birthday. Her name is in this article. Rosa Natividad Nativity Vaca. She was originally Cardona, and that name probably rings a bell, too, with some of you. Vincent, yes indeed. Bobby, that was my grandfather, who she was originally married to. He was killed working on a bridge up in Northern California. And my grandmother was born in Bakersfield. My mother was born in Ventura. My dad was born in Mexico, in Michoacan. He came over here in that age, either 3 years or 3 months. I think it was 3 years. He was 3 years old when he came here. Anyway, I just wanted to sidetrack and backtrack. And Moses. Did Gretchen say that Tony's father's name was John? Bobby. That his name was Tony. They called him Tono. John was his brother. Johnny had a brother named Tony. Tony had a brother named Johnny, and he had a brother named Joe, and they used to call him Pino. Jimmy. I was really tight with Pino. We were really good friends. Bobby. Johnny's still alive, but Pino died. Jimmy. Pino passed on pretty early. Bobby. And also, didn't it happen, if Vince's sister happened to show up that night, he didn't mention her. He's got one sister left. That's right. He didn't mention Mary's name. Bobby. He mentioned his brothers, but he didn't mention his one sister. He had that one that was married to Eddie Griego, who, one of her daughters, Jimmy. I remember Vincent's parents pretty clearly, and I saw them a number of times. What Vincent says about, quotes, across the railroad tracks, unquotes, will always stand out. When you go across the railroad tracks, there was no sidewalks, no curbs, and it was just hard adobe. There was an occasional piece of asphalt that had been there forever. Bobby, but it wasn't paved street. But it was, Jimmy, but it was, remember the little fences in the yard and stuff like that? Jimmy, this is preserved in your memories, but not in mine. I was born in 1935, and so those 1930 memories are not there to any great extent, but the 40s, yes. and then the 50s, and then the huge change which affected us all and that we've talked about previously. The dismantling of the old tortilla flats, the demolition of all the houses and surrounding areas along Front Street, Figueroa Street. Bobby, freeways coming through. Jimmy, the freeway came through and changed everybody's life. I think that's what we're trying to do here tonight, is to tell whoever might be interested some of the old stories, some of the people that were there, the way it was then. Vincent. In that era you're talking about, Jimmy, you're talking about the 40s coming up, the shopping center we had in downtown Main Street, which was Ventura. We had the New York store. We had the Ventura department store, which is the Mid-State Bank now. Moses, what was the New York store? Was that a department store or a grocery store or what? Vincent, no, it was a department store, yes. No, I hit the wrong button and the thing went way ahead. So actually, maybe I will have a sip of water. So this is a break.
And let's see where we at on the clock. So he just has make a little note.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
Yeah, sorry. I sometimes hit the wrong button. It's hard.
One hour and 47 minutes. Here and there.
An accident break.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the air's good.
You didn't hear me eat my chips?
Nope.
Okay, good.
No, I try to be really good, but sometimes my finger hits the wrong button and all of a sudden it just goes haywire. Ugh. Okay, so let me get back to where I was. Yeah, eat chips. Let me see. Fuck. I was saying I was like all doing all these short ones. I by accident grabbed like the longest one. Fuck. It's okay. It needs to be done. Oh. These dudes go on for damn ever. Okay, let me see. Holy crap. All right. Okay, I'm going to start here any second. Let me just get back to where I was. Yep, this is a long one. Okay. All right. Bobby, Mena, and Vincent Diaz. Slight accident break, and now we are going to resume. Bobby. It wasn't paved street, but it was Jimmy. But it was, remember the little fences in the yard and stuff like that? Jimmy. This is preserved in your memories, but not in mine. I was born in 35, so those 1930 memories aren't there to any great extent, but the 40s, yes, and then the huge change which affected us all in the 50s, and we've talked about it previously, the dismantling of the old tortilla flats, the demolition of all the houses and surrounding areas along Front Street, Figueroa Street. Bobby, freeway coming through. Jimmy, the freeway came in and changed everyone's life. I think that that's what we're trying to do here tonight, to tell whoever might be interested some of the old stories, some of the people that were there, the way it was then. In the era that you're talking about, Jimmy, you're talking about the 40s coming up, the shopping center that we had downtown Main Street, which was Ventura. We had the New York store, we had the Ventura department store, which is the Mid-State Bank now. Moses. What was the New York store? Was that a department store or a grocery store or what? Vincent. No, it was a department store, yes. Moses. Whereabouts was that located? Vincent. That was located Jimmy, very close to the National Market. Vincent, where Colombo Street used to be. Yeah, right next to the National Market. Jimmy, I think on one side was the National Market, and on the other side, which would be the eastern side, the New York store. Moses. And that was a department store. And they all agree to that. Jimmy, and that was where most of the kids got their clothes, shoes, their socks, their shirts, and their pants for the beginning of the school year. That was supposed to last you all year. Moses. Wasn't that real close to where that Union Ice, all of them? Yes, yes, it was right behind that. Jimmy, it was all together there. Vincent, in fact, I worked for that store in 1945, the New York store. Moses, was that your first job? Vincent, yes. Moses, well, you were a field worker. Vincent, yeah, and I worked in that store. And remember his son, John, who used to be the broadcast announcer for the baseball teams here? McCormick. Jimmy, oh, John McCormick. Vincent, Mr. McCormick, beautiful people. I used to work for Mr. McCormick, and I used to get my Levi's for me and my brother because during the war they didn't have them. They were hard to get, in other words. So I would take home a couple pair of Levi's, one for me and one for my brother when I was working at that store. One of the times, right before quitting time, I had to go to the bathroom and the people didn't know that I was in there. And then what happens? I get out and I was locked inside the store. So then I got on the phone and I called Mr. McCormick and I told him what happened. The guy he was a very cheerful guy, and he started laughing so hard he could not believe it. Moses, that was back in the day when we had to call, what, like 4 numbers? Vincent, just 5 numbers. He says, Vince, press the cash register. I didn't know whether it was a 0 or what, and pull it open, and you're going to see a key in there. And he says, get it, and you can go home. So that's how I got out of the store. They're all laughing. And then, of course, we had the J.C. Penney, where we did a lot of shopping at the J.C. Penney, and we used to have the Montgomery Wards just on this side of the library. Remember where the American Theater was? All of them. Yes, yes, we all very distinctly remember this. Vincent, do you remember? It was across the street from there. Bobby, oh, yeah, okay, right, okay. Moses, so that would be between California and Chestnut on the north side. Bobby, in fact, the American Theater at that time, it was one of the first theaters throughout the nation. They were starting to shut down theaters for whatever reason, and I think the American Theater was just one of the first. Vincent, just like the Mission Theater. Bobby, or the Flea House, as we used to call it. They all start laughing. Moses, you guys should go to those movies coming up. Were they like Spanish language movies or English? Bobby, oh no, they were all English. Vincent, if you ever went to see a Spanish language program, you had to go to Oxnard. Moses, so you guys grew up pretty much bilingual, meaning Spanish and English. Vincent, yes, because my parents would speak it at home. I wish, whenever I was in school, I wish I could have taken a course in it, really to improve it, but I never did. Jimmy, Vincent, do you remember the time that you and I took a run over to Moore Park to see a Spanish-speaking picture over there? Back when you and I worked together for Milt Ramelli? I was excited to go over there and see this film because Vincent was teaching me the language as best he could. So he decided we better go over there and see a Spanish-speaking... Do you remember? And now they're all talking at once. Vincent, it's been a long time. Jimmy, oh, I can tell you what the name of the picture was. El Jinete Fantasma. ¿Recuerdas? Vincent, oh, sí. He laughs. We were working for Ramelli. Moses, you didn't do that on company time, did you? Jimmy, no. This was in the evening. We decided to go there after work. But we had a rugged job there, surveying. There was this one anecdote, and I was prepared at your birthday party, Vincent. If they were going to ask you for little anecdotal stories, I had one prepared. The time that you and I were cutting brush for the surveyor, John Esperance, that we worked with. Vincent, yes. Jimmy, and we were out there in Moore Park area somewhere. It's a hot day. Vincent with his shirt off, and he's hacking away with his machete, and I'm right behind him, hacking away. And we get up to this old fence line where there was some old railroad tie posts, and Vincent hits it with his machete, and out comes a mad bumblebee. Comes right after him. He's rolling over in the bushes, in the brush, trying to swat this guy off. And his belly button, which is full of hair, I took note of that. This guy has a hairy belly button. And this bee drove right in there, got caught in this guy's belly button, and the poor guy, I could not believe it. The king of the Ventura River rats was subdued by a bumblebee the size of a quarter. I could not believe it. Moses, not the whole hive, just one bee. And then they're all laughing at this. Vincent, just one bee, yeah. Jimmy, one of those big, black, real harsh ones. Vincent and I were... Vincent, you know what made me quit that job? Because John, he started to go out and survey in the wilderness. We were settling these land disputes because one farmer would move the stake over so he could get more room on his land and so forth. And John, the first thing we do in the morning, right there at the Chinese store, right there, the National Chinese store there, the National Market, the Jew family, he'd go over there and get himself a little half pint of brandy. Remember? Jimmy, exactly. So by the time I used to get to the field, I was kind of half drunk with that. Twice this happened. I was coming down this hillside, and there was a rattler down there, but it was a young rattler because I jumped that son of a gun. And the next time, during a survey across a barranca, and I was the head chainman, which doesn't mean anything because you're going ahead and I'm setting up the benchmark so they could triangulate across the barranca there, and I'm putting a stake in there, and here's a big rattler right there. But it was early in the morning, and I think the thing was still cold because it just uncoiled. It didn't set itself up. That day, I almost died. And we got back to the office. I told Martin, remember Martin, who was running the office? Yes, Bob Martin. Vincent. Bob Martin, I says, I quit. Wait a minute. He says, wait a minute, what? I says, I've had my chances. I says, no way. He wanted to give me a raise. He wanted me to do this. And I said, nope, that's it. Then I ended up being in the car business after that. Jimmy. Yes, that started a whole long career in the car business. Moses. Now, Bobby Mena, talk about your first job. Bobby. Oh my gosh. Moses. You were probably working all your life, but... Bobby. Not really. I think the first job, when you said that, it comes to mind, going to work for Larrabee. We used to unload boxcars of beer. Vincent. Beer. I worked there also. Bobby. Yeah, beer. A bunch of us worked there. It was the first job I got. Anyway, that was down on, off of Front Street. Vincent. At Calorama. On the corner of Calorama and Front Street. Bobby. And Larrabee, they owned... No, was it Larrabee or was it Lagomacino? Vincent. I don't know if the Larrabees owned it or not. I think they just rented it. Bobby. They used to bring in these boxcars full of beer, and I remember, God, they were just full, and it was a tough job. We used to have to unload them, and then they'd put empties in, and then unload the other ones. Moses. Beer? You're saying beer? Bobby. Yeah, beer. Moses. And how old were you? Bobby. Oh, I don't know, 14, 15 at the time. Moses. But you didn't drink any of it, though. Bobby. Oh, heck yeah, we did. They're all laughing. The thing is, what we used to do, they'd go home, and the guy's wife, it was Larrabee, she'd come out there on the loading dock, and she would stand there and watch us and make sure that we weren't going to drink any of the beer. But the one thing that I remember distinctly, we used to figure, now, how are we going to do this? They would only allow so much breakage in each boxcar, and it was something like, they would allow maybe 300 cases, and that was a lot. And it seems like there was never more than 4 or 5 cases that were actually broken in the whole thing. So What we would do after, when we wanted some, we'd either hide it and then come back later and pick it up, or when she wasn't looking, we'd drink some of it. Of course, it was warm. And then we would break the bottle so she would just think it was part of the breakage. Vincent. Did you ever go down to the basement where they had the big refrigerator? Bobby. No. Vincent. All the beer was iced up. That's where we used to go. Bobby. Well, she used to come up, and here we were, sweating and working the dock, and she would come up there drinking beer right in front of us. Vincent. They were very hard drinkers. Moses. Is that building still there? Vincent. Yes. Bobby. I think it is. Yes. Vincent. I don't know whether it's the cement building or, you know where the wharf is? Not where this old Jimmy Moses. I think that would be the southwest corner of Front and Calorama. Vincent. I think you're right. The building is really tall. Bobby. I'm not sure, but I think everyone in the west end of Ventura at one time worked at the Las Palmas chili factory. Vincent. Yes, I did. Bobby. I did, and I can't remember when. I think it was later. Must have been after that. Vincent. That was in the early 50s, because after I quit that place, I went to work for Las Palmas, and then afterwards I got into the car business, and that was it. Moses. You sold cars? Vincent. I sold cars. I worked in the service department most of my life, and I was the service manager for one of the dealerships for a long time. Bobby. What I remember about this guy, which is very unique, and you don't see this today, at least I don't know, when they would service a car and they would get through with it, then he would deliver the car, and on the back of it, they would hook on this little motorcycle. Was it like a tricycle? Vincent. It was one of those little motorcycles, three-wheeler. Bobby. He would drive the car wherever they serviced. Ventura Motors. Vincent. That's when I got started with them. Bobby. He'd deliver the car, and then he'd get on the motorcycle and come back to the business. And he did that, and I can still see him doing that. He did that for quite a while. Moses. And where was that located? That was the old Ventura Motor Company on Main Street. Bobby. Just this side of the avenue. Moses. That was the days when they had these car dealerships on Main Street. So then they all start talking at once. Jimmy. Buick, Chevrolet. They were all there on the first block of Main Street, east from Ventura Avenue. Moses. And the cars actually used to be like in the windows, huh? Yes. Jimmy. The whole enchilada. Vincent. Oh, absolutely. They used to have some very nice new cars showing. I used to be working there all day long and into the night, getting the cars out because they didn't want the public to see them, so the factory would furnish all these big signs that we put in the front windows to cover the windows, and then they would bring the cars in after we had polished them up way in the back. Everything was really Bobby. And at the same neighborhood changed a little, and that same neighborhood changed a little bit, laughing. I've told this story before, and Jimmy, I think it ought to be said, and Vincent could relate to it, that when we would go to the movies at night, either the Ventura Theater or the American Theater, and we were on our way back at night, coming to that section of town, right toward the end here, but before you get to the avenue, there was in fact, I think it might be there still, for all I know, there was that place where they made the bread. They made French bread. And Old Man Cola was there making bread. And one of my cousins on my dad's side was Bowdy Badia. Fantastic man. Anyway, he was like a brother to me in so many ways. He used to work for them. And we used to go down there, and everybody would come down there, and you could smell the bread just as you started coming down. Vincent. Oh, all the way down Main Street. Bobby. And the Roma was just... Moses. That's the one down by Mr. Marquez barber shop. Bobby. Yes, right behind there. Vincent. The Farad building. Moses. That's actually where MB lives. Vincent. So the building is there. Bobby. And I bet you those ovens are still there. Jimmy. They are. Vincent. They are? I'll be damned. Bobby. And this is the thing. I can remember one time in particular, starts laughing, going down there, and I don't know who was with me, but we had been walking down, and somewhere on down the line we got some butter, and we were going to have French bread and butter. I remember going in there, and I can still see the old man, and he had one of those little caps on. Moses, with his apron. Bobby, yeah, taking the bread out. And I used to see him, and the thing I remember the most, he had this little stick in his mouth, and he'd walk around, and before he put the bread in the oven, he would take the stick out of his mouth, and he'd draw a line, and that's what you see, that line in the French bread. Even today. I don't know how they do it today, but I'd like to think they probably do it a little different because that wasn't very sanitary. But that's what he'd do, and he'd stick it in back into his mouth, and then he'd line the bread, and then he'd stick them in the oven. Vincent, it still tasted wonderful. Maybe that's the thing that made it taste so wonderful. Moses, that was before Prosser's, all of them. Oh yes. Bobby, later they sold that business to Prosser's, I think, didn't they? Vincent, I don't know. Bobby, and then they moved up the avenue. Moses, did any of you guys work for Prosser? All of them say no. Vincent, but I knew Mr. Prosser very well because I used to service his Toronado. Moses, so where else did you work, Bobby? Bobby, well, that bottling company on Garden Street. But that was after I got out of the service, I think. I can't really remember. Vincent. And next to the Palmas Chili Factory, which is still there. Bobby. Yes. At the time, I worked there with Peter Arianis and this guy, Lyle Jensen, I remember. Vincent. My brother Mike was driving trucks for them, too, about that time. Bobby. He was? I worked in the plant. I always wanted to drive, but I was a relief driver. I used to have to go out if some guy would sell out his truck full of all the empty soda pops, and then I would have to go take a truck to him and bring back his empties. Yeah, that was okay for a while, too. Then, like I said, I went into the service, and when I got out of the service, I went to work with civil service, and I worked at Wainimi for several years. And then I quit there and went to work for Lockheed up in Sunnyvale. Moses. You know, when we were doing the interviews the first time around, what struck me was that despite the fact that the neighborhood and you had equal access to the river and the ocean, but it seems that more people related to the river. I don't know if that's the case with you guys and then they all start talking at once. Vincent. The thing is, we used to go swimming in the river. In those days, we had a river before they put the dams up there and everything. We used to swim there because the water was warmer than going into the ocean. Bobby, yeah. Vincent, a lot of times we'd go to the ocean, Bobby, and come back in, and Vincent, and then jump in the river, and it was like jumping into a warm pool. Bobby, that's right. Exactly. I remember very distinctly. Yes. Vincent. We used to go to Seaside Park. All of that area. That was ours. There was hardly any people around. Moses. This was Seaside Park. Vincent. Seaside Park, yes. Just like we're here. We're here on a Sunday, drinking beer at the park and everything. I remember when Jack Cantrell was a policeman, he'd go by there and we'd call him over and say, "You want a beer, Jack?" And this and that. Nice man. I think he's going to be at that thing here. Moses. How old is he now? Vincent. Oh, he'd be about my age. Bobby. Yeah, he's over 70. Jimmy. That's where we all got the name Ventura River Rats. I don't know who tagged that on us, but we considered ourselves the Ventura River Rats. If you ever swam in the Ventura River, because then, from there, we would move on up to the next swimming hole. And on the other side of the car bridge, I remember there used to be a dump, and we used to swim in there, and there you had to be really careful, because if you dove too deep, laughing, sometimes you might end up cutting yourself, because they used to throw all kinds of junk in there. But it didn't matter, because it was a nice swimming hole. Vincent. Of course, The steelhead were still in the river at the time, but when we used to swim on this side of the train bridge, there were some nice holes there where we could swim, and we wouldn't bother anybody, and nobody would bother us. Then, when you went further up, you could go fishing for trout, or if you wanted to snack one of the big steelies, they were out there. Bobby. And I remember, too, there was times where the river was kind of shallow going out to the ocean, and during grunion season, I remember very distinctly going down there during the day, and the grunion would try to come up the river. I guess they just wanted to get into the river. Vincent, they would spawn. Bobby, we would scoop them up on the sand. It was that shallow. And the people wouldn't believe it. You can't catch grunion during the day. And I said, well, what are these? And that's the way it was. And then, like I said, later on, the steelhead were all trying to work their way up the river, I guess. And we could catch them on the way back sometimes. You could actually just pull them right out. Vincent, I remember the time that my brother Herbert, he grabbed one by his hand. Bobby, they were big too. Vincent, and he just pulled it out. That's how many fish used to be in that river at one time. Bobby, after the dump where we used to swim, there was another one. There was a couple of others, but there was one place in particular we called the Cliffs, up by Vincent, up by the 2 Mile Bend, up where the oil fields are, up against the cliffs there. Bobby, yeah. We used to dive off the side of this cliff, and a lot of times, and we were sober too, by the way, I know in the evening we used to skinny dip, and even up at the cliffs, I remember diving off there, laughing. Nothing stings more than that. From a height in the water, in the nude. And there was something else. Then there was this other one right up by Foster Park called Big Rock. Vincent. Oh, yeah, Big Rock, right. Bobby. Those were our swimming holes, and those were the days. And then we'd walk along the tracks and eat apricots from Canet's, and that was fun. I remember. Vincent. We always had our dates right there at the seaside park, up there. Bobby, pulled them out of the dates, just right out of the trees. Vincent, filled up our pockets with dates, and then we'd go up to the river. Jimmy, do you guys remember that incident where the word got out in the neighborhood that a gorilla was loose over there in the Hobo Jungle? I remember my mother and my father and the rest of us kids right along with quite a number of different families and people were lined up along Seaside Park there, right on the edge of the river. And they were talking and pointing. Did you see? Did you see them over there? Thinking that maybe they could see this gorilla over in the cypress trees, over in the jungle. And it was not just a few moments, but it went on for a while. They were down there for a while. Moses, how old do you think you were, Jimmy? Jimmy, I think I was about 6. And Moses, so then what years were we talking about? Jimmy, okay, well, we're talking about maybe 1941. Jimmy, yeah. The story was it must have been a hoax or a rumor because no one ever saw the gorilla. But the word was out that he was over there, and it was a big, exciting thing happening, especially for a kid. You can imagine. And they're laughing. Bobby, I don't remember that. Vincent, I don't either. Bobby, I can remember going over to Hobo Jungle, which is over after you cross that first bridge, the first section right there. In fact, a World War II that was a gun encampment emplacement. And they had a big gun there. Vincent, they still have the concrete installation where they used to have the anti-aircraft guns. Bobby, and then the next bridge over there is what we used to call the second mouth. And we used to go over there and shoot turtles, a lot of turtles. And we used to go over there looking for a crotch, and then we would make a slingshot. And that was our fun in those days, too. Vincent, we used to look forward to when we used to get out of school to get down to the river. And we would just be down there for hours and hours playing over there. All the vegetation, making little houses out there. Remember that? Bobby, yeah, that was great. Vincent, and then we'd get some potatoes that we'd ask for from my mom. Bobby, I remember that. Vincent, and we'd cover them with mud, make a fire, and then put them on top of the coals and eat some potatoes. Jimmy, it was just a fantastic playground. Vincent, it was. And if the children nowadays could have that kind of opportunity to go out there into the wilds, what we call the wilds, there could be a different type of society than we have right now. Jimmy, oh, right, absolutely. Vincent, of course, television has now robbed everyone of their childhood. Everybody wants to sit in front of the TV. Bobby, you talk about my first job. Now I stop and think, of course, I was very young at that time. My grandmother was fascinated by the circus, and when the circus would come into town, they would come by rail and they would stop there at the depot there, and that's when they used to have animals to pull the wagons and all that kind of stuff. And they would go down to the Seaside Park. And at one time, Seaside Park had a big racetrack there, a full-blown racetrack, and they used to set up the circus within the track there. I remember going down there and working just to try to get a job so that we could earn a pass to go see the circus that day. Even Ringley Brothers came there at different times in the earlier days. Vincent, L.G. Barnes, Bobby, L.G. Barnes and Clyde Beatty. That was a fun thing. And then when we didn't have that over there, not far from the flats, there was a great big lot, a great big field there, and that's where they used to have the carnivals. That was fun too. Jimmy, yeah, Eugene Avalos called me up in the hour before we started interviewing this evening here, and he was just clued in. He says, Jim, do you know what? We ought to think real serious about putting on tape some of these old stories and stuff like that. And I says, guess what? Vincent and Bobby are coming over here tonight, and we're going to be doing just that, talking about stories. And he says, ask them if they remember the old Salvation Army when it caught on fire and burned down. Vincent, yes, we were there. Jimmy, so was I. I was on my dad's shoulder watching this fire. You guys were there too? So was Eugene. 3 stories, Moses, 3 stories, wooden structure on the corner of Oak and Meta. Vincent, yes, Oak and Meta. Jimmy, and the whole neighborhood was down there watching this building, this tremendous fire. It burned completely to the ground. And when it started caving in, the firemen just backed off. Vincent, well, Bobby, you remember when the pavilion burned down. Bobby, oh, yeah, down at the park? Vincent, absolutely. Bobby, oh, yeah, that was a great, beautiful, big building down there. A great, big, beautiful building. Vincent, the National Guard used to use it as a place to gather and so forth. That thing caught fire one night, and they still don't know whether it was deliberately set or not. Moses, that was a night fire? How about the old Salvation Army building, day or night? Jimmy, it was in the afternoon. Moses, in the afternoon? Jimmy, yup. Bobby, another mystery fire for me was, or what I remember, it was just about the time that World War II broke out, and on the corner of Main and Palm Street, there was a market there. I think it was owned by the Japanese State Supermarket. Anyway, all of a sudden, right during that whole period, I don't know exactly, it burnt too. Nothing was ever said, and I don't know if someone did it deliberately because it was Japanese owned or whatever. Vincent, and then a block up ahead we had the P&H Market. Bobby, that's right. And in between that was, I forgot about this, the State Cafe. Vincent, the State Cafe, the Rendezvous Room, and all of those places. Moses, and those places are still there. Bobby, Hickey's Hardware, remember? Hickey's? Vincent, Hickey's Hardware, my goodness. Corner of Palm and Main there. They have that restaurant there now. Moses, how about Benny's Market? Bobby, that's coming back to the neighborhood. Vincent, down on Meta? Benny was a nice man. Bobby, right across from where Tony Flores lived. Vincent, yes, yes, right across the street. And of course, this is a gathering place for the guys and their age and that era. Benny would Benny used to like to drink, so he'd call them the boys, and they'd get into the back room and break out his liquor, and then they'd have one heck of a drinking session in his little market, laughing. But they'd be quiet if they were the older guys in those days, and they'd just have one hell of a bobby. That was probably the closest market around that we could get anything at the time, and it was right across the street from the park. Vincent, yeah. Same thing with Ralph's. Bobby, further up the street, yeah. Vincent, they used to have the same thing. Moses, there was a church right there on that stretch of park, too, wasn't there? Vincent, yes, the Baptist church. La Iglesia Angelica or something. Moses, Evangelista? Vincent, Evangelista, yes. Bobby, in fact, you remember Echeverria? They used to live there. I can't think of the brother's name, and right next door was one of my cousins, Chico, the Diaz. They lived there, and then on the other side, you ever know the Jimmy? Yes, in fact, they lived very close. The families were real close, and they lived actually, Bobby, on the other side of the track there. Jimmy, boy, what a deal! I can remember one time as a small kid. Vincent, I remember going to school with Carmen. Jimmy, we were visiting the friends. I was the youngest kid. I was hanging around the adults. They were playing dominoes down in the bottom in the living room, but upstairs, and there was an attic up there, and the kids were having fun playing up there in the attic. So I got a little curious. I was a little 5-year-older. I get curious, and I go up there, and sure enough, in the ceiling of the second story, there was this little crawl space up there. And the kids were getting up there and playing in the attic, so they coaxed me up there, and then they closed me in there and left me in there. I almost died, of course, came near death. But it was one of those frightful experiences that a kid gets put through by these older kids. Yeah, we knew the friends very good. Gordon and Ernest. Vincent. Yeah, there we go. Gordon. Jimmy. Gordon was a well-known guy, as well as Ernest, for being a boxer. He one time fought for the middleweight championship for the state of California. I, along with a bunch of other local kids, we watched it there at the bathhouse. There was a teen time there at the time, and the kids would go, and they had, well, it was the beginning of television. Well, they had a television set in there. 10 inches was about as big of a screen as you'd ever see during that time, but there we were, gathering, watching Gordon fight for the state championship. He lost the fight, but he put up a good battle. He was an excellent boxer, trained hard. Moses. Let's get back. We're kind of going all over the place, which is just fine because a lot of information comes out this way. The story about the swing dancing? Bobby. Oh, well, I first saw swing dancing when I was in the Navy. I was stationed out at China Lake, but then I went to a school down in San Pedro for a couple of leaves, and I went to the Majestic Ballroom on the Pike in Long Beach. This was the first time I ever saw swing dancing, and it was like a taxi dance. They had these chains up all around the floor, and you had to pay 10 cents to get a dance on the floor, but the thing is, they didn't have, like, girls to dance with. Bobby. So you paid for each dance, and you brought your own partner or whatever, and they had these big bands there, and I saw swing dancing for the first time, and I just fell in love with it. I thought, my gosh, this is wonderful. I remember I would come home, and even after I got out of the service, because we used to jitterbug in those days, but this was a slow way of dancing, I thought, gee, this is the way to go. I was trying to explain this to my cousin, Dolores Cardona, at the time, and her brother Dickie, and I was trying to show them what I had learned and how we came about, and we used to go. Well, originally it was called The Castle at one time, and then later on it became Rory Calhoun, the actor, bought it, and then it was quite the place to go. Everybody and his brother used to go to it. Then, later, at the Bandar, but when Rory Calhoun had it, It was a fun place to go, and that's where I used to dance a lot. I remember we were probably one of the first ones that ever did that type of dancing around, and now everybody does it. But it was fun. I remember seeing it for the first time, and I just could not believe what I was seeing. It was such a different style. I don't know that I brought it, but anyway, at the time, we were the only ones that were doing it. It just kind of slowed down a bit and danced to the beat. You were great dancers. This is Jimmy. I remember seeing you guys dancing. Dickie, of course, is still the world's greatest swing dancer. He loves it. Bobby. And that's how it came about, and now the bandar's gone. I see they're building it back up again. We used to go from the bandar over to the sidecar, back and forth, and now the sidecar is getting ready to open again, too. I don't know what that's all about, but anyway, those were the fun days. Moses. All right, any more stories? What do you think, Jimmy? Jimmy. I don't know. I think we've really put down a nice one up to this point. We brought out a lot of good things, and the boys talked real well. Moses. Any other, friends from those times who weren't mentioned that you can think of? Jimmy. You know, Vincent's uncle, I guess George Pacheco was an uncle of yours. Bobby. Well, no, he was my uncle. Jimmy. Okay, Vincent, tell us. Back in the days when Tony Flores and you first got together and started the band and all that, wasn't George at the time already in his 70s? Vincent. Oh yeah. Jimmy. He was up there. Vincent. He was on his way up there. Yeah. Jimmy. And he played the bass, stand-up bass, for Los Caballeros. Moses. So what kind of music did this band play? And what kind of songs do you think? Vincent. Our band played, well, we were versatile. We could play corridos, the fast shuffle, Mexican dances. We could play boleros. We could play the regular dance music. And I guess that's the reason we got pretty popular there. Moses. And did you guys in that band have a vocalist or just the instrumentals? Vincent. No, he starts laughing. I did a bit of vocalizing and I didn't like it. Your cousin would always make fun of the way he called me Mr. Fogg. Bobby. Tony? Vincent. Yeah. Bobby. My cousin. He's my cousin. Laughing. Vincent. He called me the Velvet Fog. Anyway, so afterwards, I ended up being the guitar player in the band. There was no bass player. And I always wanted to play lead guitar, and I was telling this to Jimmy. I used to have to play full chords for the group to give them backup so that they could have a good sound in there. So I was playing guitar chords, and I was playing piano chords in there to get what we call pick up the bottom. We were pretty versatile. In fact, when the rock and roll started coming in, we started playing a little bit of it, but we wouldn't play it unless there was a young crowd that wanted to hear it. Usually we started playing for the older people. Moses. So you guys might do something like Stardust or songs like that. Vincent. Yes. Bobby. They had what are considered standards today. Vincent. Right. Jimmy. But they had to take some specialty numbers like Yakety Yak, Don't Talk Back. He sings that. And take out the paper in the trash. Vincent. Yes, that's right. Jimmy. And the guys did a splendid job of that all the time. It was like one of their trademark numbers. Bobby. Well, one of the years, Tony, he had a lot of different top musicians playing with him. I remember one time he had this one kid that played drums and he also played trombone. He was a local, a Japanese kid. And that guy could sing in Spanish. Oh, I used to just love to listen to hear him sing. JC. Jimmy. Nobu Isarai. Bobby. He would sing Sabor a Mi and do a beautiful job on that. Moses. He was Japanese? Bobby. Yes, he was Japanese. I think somebody said that he had been in one of those big bands at the time. Vincent. Ted Estrada? Bobby. Yeah, one of those big bands. Yeah. Vincent. He played trombone. Bobby. Yes, and he was good. They all start talking. Moses, what year do we think that was? Bobby, oh golly. Jimmy, Nobu Isarai. Moses, if this was like 1956, would that be before or after this? Bobby, oh, it was afterwards, maybe around the 70s. Oh, yes. Jimmy answers his phone. Hello? Moses, did this bring in any money for you? Vincent, oh, yes, yes. In fact, I'd always said that during the time I played, every penny that I made playing went home. I had 3 young children, and that helped me raise my family along with my regular job. A lot of guys would drink up the money even before the time it was to get paid, so they ended up owing money to the club. But I brought all my money back, and that's how Moses, it was like a supplemental income. Vincent, absolutely. That's exactly what it was. Bobby, and I'll add that he did a really beautiful job because he put 2 girls through Stanford University, and that was not easy, I'm sure. And I'm sure he had his days, but that was wonderful. I think that was quite a... Jimmy, those girls of yours are so wonderful. They were such a gracious host at your birthday party, Vincent. How old are they now? Vincent, one of them is, the oldest one, Valerie, is about 40, and Christine, she's about 36 or 37, and then Marcia, which I call my baby, she's 32. Moses, so you were pretty old when they were born. You weren't 20 or so. You were older. Vincent, no, because when I got married, I was 27 years old. And then about a year later, I had my first girl. And then I planned that every 3 years we would have a girl, laughing. Not a girl, a baby. They're all talking. I was trying to go for a baby boy, but the last girl I had, the doctor says, uh-oh, looks like you have a football player coming in through here. Nope, you better settle for that tennis player. So I had 3 girls, and that was that. But I was blessed with 3 wonderful girls. Jimmy, sure were. Bobby, and I've got 4, by the way. Moses, you have 4? What are their ages? Bobby, well, gee whiz. My oldest one, she's in her 50s. How old is Denise now? She's back in Kentucky, and she's about 51. And then I have another daughter that I raised. Actually, it's my stepdaughter, but I raised her, and she's going to be 50. And then I have a son who's, so he's in his late 40s. And then my youngest son, he's 42, I guess. Vincent, this is the house that is still there, where the Brooks used to live. And this is our house here. And this is my mother, my wife, my sister, and her children. Moses, so in this picture, you think you're going back to the place where your house was? So what year do you think that was? Vincent, that was about 52, maybe. Jimmy, no, that had to be more 54. Jimmy, I think you're right there, about 54. Moses, as I remember, there's 3 houses left over there. There's B. Wyatt's house, and then there's the house next door to that. Is that the one right under the freeway? And then there's the street, and then there's one other house. Vincent, okay, I think the other one is where Joe with the animals. Jimmy, Joe, wait a minute now. Vincent, Rosie's dad. Bobby, Carbajal. Jimmy, Carbajal, that's right. Vincent, I think that's the house, and that would be right here in the back, and I think that's the house you're talking about. Moses, that's the one right next door to B. Wyatt then. Bobby, there's only 3 houses there now. Vincent, yes, that would be only 3 houses, so right now I couldn't tell you exactly if that house would be right next to B. Wyatt's or not. Moses, so we know it's not B. Wyatt, so that would have to be the one right next to B. Wyatt's, or the one up the street a little closer, or across the street from where B. Wyatt and that second house is, and a little closer toward Maine. It's just a little bit closer. Jimmy, you see those 3 trees right there? Is that telling us? Bobby, I think those are the 3 trees at the May Henning School, maybe. Vincent, no, they're not. Jimmy, no, they're not. Okay, well then that settles that. Vincent, Those are at Seaside Park. Jimmy, okay, that's right. This is Meta Street like this, and so that would be toward the ocean then. Vincent, I'm going to have to drive down there and just look at it again. Jimmy, yeah. And then they all agree on that. Moses, well, I want to thank you guys for giving us a wonderful addition to the archive. Since we're on a roll here with your birthday, and then this is taping, and then the reunion coming up, somewhere down the way we'll recreate that mural and incorporate new images, And as you guys tell stories, we just start visualizing them. We want to give people, the community, something fresh, something they know, and something fresh, too. Jimmy, absolutely. Bobby, and there were some characters, too, that I remember. I don't know how old they were or what they were, but it's like there was this guy that used to be to that house, the Valdez. Vincent, those guys were all World War I veterans. Bobby, they were older, yes, and this one little guy that used to whittle. Vincent, okay, that was Joe. Bobby, you could always tell whenever he was, because Vincent, okay, our house was there, and then there was an alley that went through here, and then the Goldman's house was there, and that was their brother, I think. He used to live in a little house in the back because he was kind of cuckoo. Bobby, yeah, there was something. Vincent, Frankie Wells, but he was, you could always tell, he would have a pile of wood. Bobby, he'd whittle, and the wood would make a pile, and we'd say, oh, Frankie's been here. Vincent, and he'd get a couple little sticks and start playing drums on the table, but he wouldn't bother nobody. Bobby, who was the one? Oh, I know. I was thinking of Castillo. He was the one who, Vincent, that lost a leg? Bobby, that lost a leg, yeah. Jimmy, yeah, I think that was Castillo. Vincent, he got drunk and then he says something about the tracks, and then they're all talking. Bobby, we used to follow those guys around. Jimmy, right behind the house where we lived, Castillo and some of his buddies would, if they could score a little something to drink, they would hang out back there, and he was quite a character, with one leg off. I think was taken off by the train. Bobby, I think so, down by the tracks. Somebody told me that. Jimmy, he was down there, and unfortunately he was under the weather, and the train took his leg off. Vincent, remember Bill, the old colored guy that used to carry his drums around? Jimmy, yeah. Vincent, he used to carry the drums down at the fairground, or else he'd sit on the corner and play his drums. And then we had some name that played guitar. He'd used to go out to the American Legion all the time. It was a national drum set, and if you recall, the drums that they had in the 1930s, they had these coconuts in front of them. Bobby. And this guy comes up to my cousin at the time, Chico Padilla, and asks him, he says, Chico, he says, for 2 cents I'd leave. And he says, 2 cents? Is that all you need? Because he wanted to go get a drink, and it was early in the morning. He says, yeah, for 2 cents. And Chico says, I think I can help you there. And he reached in his pocket and gave him 2 cents, and he says, thanks. And so he took off, and pretty soon here comes Walt looking for him. Where did Guido Astorga go? And Chico said, he wanted 2 cents, so I gave it to him, and he left. JC, thinking he had enough. Bobby, yeah, I guess so. He was quite a character, too. You could see him all over town, or at least in the West End when he grew up. Those were some fun times. Moses, 2 things real quick that we haven't talked about, and I don't know if any of you had any stories or any connections to. Well, we had baseball teams that played over there. Bobby, yeah, they had a AAA. The Yankees had a farm there once. In fact, one of the top pitchers, I think, I want to say Larson, I don't know, but later he ended up with the Yankees. Moses, Don Larson? Bobby, got to be big time, yeah, but he played there. Vincent, before they brought that Pacific Coast League, there used to be local baseball players. Jimmy, the Ventura Browns was one. Victor, Eddie Griego and Phil Marquez, Joe Lorenzana, Gilbert Diaz, Mike Diaz, and all those guys. That's when we had the original park, before they built the park at the other end to bring in the semi-pros in there. That was a community type situation where all the local guys would go on Saturday or Sunday and something, all the people. And people didn't have any other place to go, and they had this nice baseball thing going on for them. The same thing like at the VCR, which was right there at the pavilion. They had the basketball teams playing and all the local guys playing there. Moses. Actually, I think Phil Marquez, doesn't he have a lot of those kinds of pictures up at the shop? Bobby. Oh, I bet he does. Yeah, because he was a baseball player, if I remember correctly. Moses. And won't he be there Saturday night? Jimmy. Yes, he and his wife Angie will be there. He is looking forward to it. Vincent. Did you interview him? Moses. Marquez. No, we visited his place, but we didn't get an interview with him. Jimmy. You know, a person who's amenable for an interview is Robert Oliveira. He lives on Park Row. And Bobby. He's my stepbrother. Jimmy. He is? Bobby. Yeah. Vincent. Is he going to be there that night? Jimmy. He is going to be there also. Vincent. Is he really? Good, good. Jimmy. These are potential interviews there. Bobby. He could tell you some stories, I'm sure. Jimmy. Yep. And another 10 years older than Bobby. This guy's Sonny. I think that's his brother. He's one of the younger ones. My mom married their dad. I think she had 4 of them left. Sonny and Jackie and Bernice and Tiny, they called him. Jimmy. Tiny. David. Bobby. He had 9 kids. And then they had my sister later, my sister Suzanne, who passed on a few years ago. So that was quite a family. Moses. The Carbajal. What was his name in the picture? Bobby. Oh, John Carbajal. He lives in Oxnard. Moses. Let's say one last question. A whole lot of people have a hard times with this. In terms of the neighborhood itself, when it started being called Tortilla Flats, because we've also heard it called Tiger Town, and we've also heard it called, I guess way back at the turn of the century, maybe Spanish Town or Indian Town, different names for the neighborhood. Vincent. Okay, when they used to call Tortilla Flats Tiger Town, after the picture came out of Tortilla Flats with Steinbeck's book, that's where they got the tag of Tortilla Flats. Moses. That's what, mid-40s? 44? Jimmy. 39 is when he published his book. The movie was 1940. Moses. Oh, really? Well, that's a little bit earlier than... But prior to that, it was known as Tiger Town? Vincent. Yes. Moses. What was the relationship between a tiger and the west end of Ventura? Vincent. Well, I would be guessing, so I'm not going to say, because this is before my time, and I was a youngster then. That would be related more to Phil or Bob Oliveira. Bobby. Those guys could probably tell you. Moses. Okay. Bobby. They're a little older than us. Vincent. Yeah, we want to be as authentic as we can in giving you this information. And instead of hearing it from somebody else that lived 5 miles away, and I mean, because we were there. Moses. You know, one of the things that we do, because we've interviewed so many people, somebody would say something and then maybe on a whole other night, somebody else would verify it, right? So we'd remember, we've heard this story before, and we relied on that a lot. Now we're getting the same story told by different families at different times. And that's the value of this too. To verify the people there, the stories, the stores, and like that. Bobby. The vet hospital where Joe Carbajal, I just remember the name of it, that was Dr. Huchin. Jimmy. Dr. Huchin, yes, indeed. Bobby. And Joe worked for him for years and years. And then they all agree on this and they remember him. Moses. So are we ready for the big... Bobby. Yeah, we're ready. Jimmy. Yeah, and Vincent, tell me what time it is. Vincent. 9 o'clock. Moses. 9 o'clock? I'm going to go turn this thing off. And thus ends this actual interview of Vincent Diaz and Bobby Mena and Jimmy Capito.